Hi, my name is Frank Perini and welcome to this video today. I'll be discussing communication channels. If you are studying for the PMP exam, or maybe you've already taken it, you're probably familiar with this formula that I have here. This formula is used to calculate the number of communication channels between a group of people or stakeholders on a project. If you're not familiar with this, you will be if you are preparing for the PMP exam. This is one of the formulas that you're going to have to memorize for the exam. And basically, this formula is due to geometry. And I'll demonstrate that shortly with a little Python script. But the reason I'm discussing this today is, when I studied for my PMP exam, a long time ago, I remember this was one of those things where I thought, this formula is kind of probably something I'll never have to really use or think about. And in a way, that's true. I mean, you'll never really sit down, I don't think, and calculate the communication channels on your project exactly and document that and present that. That's obviously not a probably very useful function. But what this does do is a good job of explaining how programs and projects can become very complex very quickly every time you add even just one or two more people to your project. So let's first discuss, how this works and what this looks like, and I'll show some visual examples that I think will really help drive the point home. And then I'll also kind of explain my experience with, why this is so important. So first, you have to apply this number n to this formula, and the number n basically just represents the n number of people, the stakeholders that are on your project. So if you're already learning PMP, you're probably going to be very familiar with most of this. If you're not, this would probably be useful for you to learn. So stakeholders are not just the people on the team, but of course they are the team members, which, that would be like, your engineers or your workers, of course, the project manager, right? So obviously the core team members, those are all stakeholders. But, and I just realized I have steak as in beefsteak, probably because I'm thinking about a ribeye steak right now. So stakeholders, not stakeholders. So the stakeholders would include the team members, engineers, workers, project manager. But also it would include, executive management, because, the executive management team, your CFO, your CEO, your finance director, they may not be working with you every single day on this project, but they are going to get communication. They are going to communicate to the project, so they're involved. But then there's even more, there's government. So, if you're working on a project that needs permitting, applications, you may be communicating and working with the government for approval. There's the community in general. If you're working on a project, I've worked on projects in the past that could have had impacts on the surrounding community, whether it's related to noise, emissions, all those things can affect the community. And as a project manager, you may have to manage almost in a way community relationships and make sure that the communication is happening properly and that the right things are being communicated, because that could really affect the success of a project. There's team members, of course, there's vendors. So, anybody that's providing you goods or services, you'll have to be working with them. So you can see this, the stakeholders list can get very big depending on your type of project. You may have some of these, you may not have some of these, but I guarantee most projects, very few projects have 2 or 3 people. I would say almost every project, in my experience, has to have at least 10 people, because you've got your core team members plus your customers, which I didn't even mention, customers, right? You got your customers, you've got your internal customers, your external customers. You have so many people that are involved with any project. So this N number is basically the sum of all those people that would be communicating, all the stakeholders that would be communicating on a project. And I just want to demonstrate how quickly this can become extremely complex, meaning if you go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, every increment has a significant impact on the complexity. And you can open an Excel spreadsheet and just calculate this, right? And you can look at the number. But I want to show this visually because I think it'll really drive home, just how much more complex a project can get. So don't worry about this code. This is a little Python code that just creates a geometric shape based on n number of points. So this is n equals 3. So I'm going to screenshot that. Actually, I had an old one there. So let me grab that and we'll throw that in our notebook. Just for illustration, we'll call this n equals 3, okay? And then let's go back to Python and let's run this for 5. Let's just add 2 people to our project. And you can see already going from this triangle to just 2 more people, there's a lot more lines of communication already. But you might be thinking, okay, that's still not too bad. I can manage that. I would agree. So let's add another, let's go to n equals 7. Let's just add 2 more people. Let's just go in increments of 2, just to show that even just adding 2 people can have an insane impact on your project. So this is n equals 2. So now you can see the complexity is really starting to build up. So we went from 3 to 5 to 7, and you can see just going from 3 to 7 is an incredible increase in complexity and the number of lines of communication happening around you. You're in the middle as the project manager. Technically you're one of these points, right? But if you're in the middle of this triangle with all these people communicating, you're managing 3. But now if you're standing in the middle of this, you're managing all of this. So let's keep going. Let's do n equals 9. Okay, much more complex. Let's throw that in our notebook. Call that n equals 9. Let's do a couple more just because it gets very complex very quickly. It's pretty interesting. So now we're at 11. Okay. And like I said, in my experience, I would say n equals 11 is probably the minimum number of people on any, reasonable sized project. Of course, if it's a micro project, you might have less people, but not too often. Let's go to n equals 20. So we got 20 people, which still it's a very reasonable number. It's not that many to have. You might have 5 core team members, a few managers, a few customers, right? And maybe a quality department, whatever. I mean, you can get to 20 people in no time. Let's see what that looks like. That's a lot of lines of communication. I mean, just imagine you're standing in the middle of this and all these possible lines of communication are happening and you're trying to intercept them and make sure that the right people are talking to the right people. Okay, let's do one more after this and then, okay, let's do one more. Let's do n equals, let's say you have 40 people, which still, again, 40 people is not, it's maybe a little bit bigger, but it's still totally within the realm of possibility. You could have 15 engineers, you could have 5 purchasing people, you're at 20 people right there. You have maybe 5 executives, 25. I mean, it's not so hard to get to 40 people on a project. Let's see what that would look like. Let me adjust the size just so it doesn't go off the screen. A little bit. Okay, so let's look. This is 40 people. And you can see that the line density is so dense that it's almost a solid black object. That's how dense the lines are. That's how many possible lines of communication are going on. And you as the program manager, you have to make sure the right people are communicating to the right people, that the information is getting to where it's got to go. Now, granted, it's not every day that the junior engineer directly sends communication to the CEO, but it's happened. And you as a program manager, you don't want to be caught off guard with something like that. So let's save that. So this is 40 people on a project. Okay. So you can see we went from going from 3 to 10 or 11 people has a huge impact and complexity. Going from 10 to 20 has a enormous impact, and then going from 20 to 40 is just insane. There's just an insane amount of communication happening with that many people on a project. So, why is this so important? Well, I literally just started thinking about this the other day because I had a situation happen where one person talked to another person. I can't go into the details, but basically something that was supposed to happen didn't happen. And when I inquired why, they said, well, I told the engineering group about it. I said, okay. And then I started trying to figure out, well, why didn't engineering take action, and why didn't things happen? And what it came down to was one person, one node in this large project that I have communicated with another node. So they told somebody on the engineering team, but that person works on a lot of projects, and they weren't the person that really managed that on my project. So even though they were notified about this issue, they weren't able to take action. They weren't the right person. So that's why, if you have a large group of engineers working with buyers, working with planners, working with management team, the communication is so important. And the reason and what is the application of this? The application is you want to avoid this. You don't want 100 people, talking to 100 other people. You want to make sure that you have a good communication plan so that, I don't want to ever block communication. I don't want to say that, you cannot talk to these people, but I want formal communication to be driven to the right people. So if you think about it, what is a communications plan? A communications plan is you might have 40 people on your project, and they're all going to be talking to each other, and that's okay. And they all can talk to each other, and they all should talk to each other. They're all on the team working together. But your communication plan is an attempt to to go backwards down into this n number, so that your formal communication, so that you don't have n equals 40 quantity of formal communication channels. You don't want the junior engineer being able to formally email the CEO in most cases. So you're going to develop a proper communication plan. You don't want an engineer just sending an email to, a government official. That's got to go through the right channel and the right, to the right people. So a communications plan is really taking this complicated, crazy amount of communication possibility lines that could still be happening on the side, but setting up a formal communication framework that's maybe n equals 7 or n equals 9. So you might say all formal information for legal goes to this group or this person in this way. All formal engineering changes go to this node. That's what a communications plan is. Communications planning is taking a very complex number of communications that could happen and developing a framework that puts them into a reasonable, manageable number like n equals 9, n equals 7. Even n equals, I think this was 20, n equals 20 is unmanageable. You can't have 20 lines of communication. You need maybe 5, 6, 7. In my opinion, if you can get down to 7 lines of communication for engineering changes, planning, that is a communications plan. And that failed to happen on a project I'm working on. So I suddenly started thinking about this, and I thought about, well, what is the purpose of this formula? So it's a little bit academic, of course, for the test, calculating the number, but the application of this formula is, as you develop a communications plan, as you develop a communications matrix, you're trying to take this communication and develop a plan that puts all the formal communications into a plan that creates this n equals 7 scenario where all these people know when I send a communication to this person, or when I send a communication for this reason, this is the proper communications channel. So that's really the application of this, is figuring out how many communication channels you want on your project, and developing a communication plan to drive that improved ability to manage by decreasing the complexity. So I hope that you found this video a little bit interesting and useful. Again, you're definitely going to want to memorize this formula if you're studying for the PMP exam, and you're going to want to apply that on the exam, obviously. But how can you apply this if you're already out in the field and you're working? Think about your communication plan. Think about how many levels, how many communication lines are you driving with your communication plan. If there's 40 lines of communication, it's going to look like this and it's going to be a mess. So first step is, how can we get down to 10? How can we get down to 9? How do we get down to 7 lines of formal communication? Again, I don't want to block informal communication because I don't want to impede progress, but I also don't want formal communication just going everywhere. So I hope you found this video interesting and useful. Feel free to check out my other videos. I do a lot of tutorials on Microsoft Project, project and program management, best practices. So please subscribe and feel free to check out those videos, and look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks.